Well, hello there. I had a few minutes during my workday here. I wanted to do a quick stream with my buddy here, who has now decided to get up, and kind of go through We Are Scarlet Twilight 2. At least the first half of it, give you a better look at some artwork and explain some of what I was trying to do with the comic. As always, I want to check out the link below. We've got a link to the Zoop campaign, which is issue 4, and also a collection of the entire hardcover. So, the whole series in hardcover. So, if you like what you see, give that a look. It just started a couple days ago, and we are just not going to cooperate, are we, bud? Yeah, right back where you started. There was no point to this at all. At all. Well, anyway, so link below is to the Zoop campaign, which is going great so far. So, like I said, just wanted to run through some of the previous issues. There's a few spoilers here, so if you like your spoilers unspoiled and you haven't checked out 1 through 3 yet, you may want to skip this one. But if not, I wanted to just go through number 2, like I said, show you some art, go through some of the thinking. What you see here is the cover to number 2. Zoom out, give you an idea of the whole thing. So I kind of was really heavily inspired by, you probably guessed if you've seen the Batman the animated series, the red sky, the way that we're doing these buildings here is always something I've loved, and always am looking for a way to incorporate that kind of look. I really dig it. The other part of what I was going for here was just to show the villainess here, Madame Satanica, triumphant. She's on top of the world. She's in this fancy place. She's got all sorts of jewelry and stuff, just to show that she is winning, more or less. As when Captain Lancet wakes up in the future at the end of issue 1, he sees that she's taken over the world, and he's going to be in a pretty tight spot. The blood here is a reference, not necessarily a reference that you need to understand or recognize, but a moment in a movie I really like called The Adventures of Robin Hood with Errol Flynn. It's from, I want to say, 1939. There's a point at the beginning where the two bad guys are plotting about what they're going to do to England, and there's this weird moment that seems to take place very much in the vocabulary of older movies, where they knock down a bottle of wine and it spills, and it definitely is meant to look like blood. And there's no reason that should necessarily be something to emphasize as sinister, but they do, and it really works. It's a cool moment, and so I kind of wanted to just nod to that here. I think it works if you don't get the reference, and if you do, it adds a little bit. And then additionally, we know, if you've read the story, that she's a vampire at this point, and she's spilling blood. It shows A, she's spilling it, if it's blood, and B, that she's got an abundance of it. She's wasting it, so she's living pretty high on the hog here. So next image I want to go through. This is kind of the unaged version. I had some effects to make it look like an old printing press of the variant cover to number 2. There's a lot of old illustrators. I want to say Cole Phillips is the one that mainly I think of that did this technique where you drop out the shapes, so you have colors blending together between foreground and background, and it lets you kind of decide. Your outlines are not necessarily going to determine all the contours of your shapes. It can be this shape gets to be more of a highlight, which I think for superheroes is a really cool thing to do. Their colors and their logos are the big draw in a lot of ways as far as how the visuals of the superheroes were designed. And Captain Lancet is certainly no exception to that. So this is kind of what I was going for there. Hopefully that worked out pretty well. I think it was fun. There's a lot of old covers, and sometime I'll do a breakdown video on all my variant covers and the specific things I was referencing and looking at that led me to develop those. But they'd have great typesetting in these old pulp magazines and quarterly adventure magazines. And so there's stuff like this I've seen. They'd have a billion different fonts on there, which is this is a nod to, and then the way they'd label it was generally pretty fun type-wise as well. So that is the second cover. It's just kind of our catch-up page. It tells you what happened in issue 1. Captain Lancet was in the 30s. He was secretly a vampire. He ran afoul of this demon that put him in a coma for 100 plus years, and wakes up and finds himself in this dark future world where the villainess he was fighting in the 30s, Madame Satanica, has now taken over the world with her Scarlet Twilight cult. And that will bring us to the first page. And this is kind of a fun cutaway thing. There's some old Batman pages where they'd start off a story by saying, here's the Batman, and they'd have a really cool splash page, more or less, which is really interesting because you didn't see a lot of that in the older comics. They were generally really small panels. I think that I've read interviews where they said, oh, the editors back in the day thought you were getting away with something if you drew less than 9 panels for them because it was less work for the artist. But it's always, obviously, I think we've realized now, much more impactful. So this was kind of a nod to that. And instead of picking up right in the story beats, I kind of used this montage explainer, sort of newsreely type of a story structure to get us back to where we want to start the story. So in issue 1, we meet this guy, Maxie, who is Captain Lancet's sidekick, kind of his driver. And we don't know too much more about him than that. And when we next see him here, he's this one of many clones, kind of, and in front of an American flag, kind of a very heroic, almost recruitment poster type of a look. In fact, when I was laying out this issue, I think my placeholder for page 1 was an old recruitment poster, so I could remind myself. Sometimes I'll do a sketch, and most times I'll actually do a sketch. But in this case, if there's a really close thing I'm referencing, I'm not going to copy it directly. I'll definitely have a different layout, but I'll just plop that into my layouts sometimes, just so I say, oh yeah, a thing like that. And that is what I did here. I'm pretty glad with how this page turned out. I did not really get too much into the drawing before coloring, and I think that was a good move because it let the colors really shine here and let me, push this area forward and let these guys go back and let the flag and the clouds carry a lot of the color interest. So we do a quick flashback here. This is another view on the last scene of issue 1, where this demon has been summoned. He's holding Madame Satanica, and Captain Lancet is, immobilized by the power of this otherworldly, other dimension type of creature. So we see that Maxie was watching that from the shadows, wisely stayed out of the mix, and we see him dragging Captain Lancet away, presumably after the demon and the bad guys have left, and he gets him out of danger in a way that we can only really explain in that sort of golden age, vocabulary where things can just happen and we're somewhere else, and it's sort of okay. That's, like I said in my other videos, that's something I really enjoyed being able to use, not just for expediency on my part, but also just it lets me move to a more interesting part of the story, because I don't think generally it would be maybe more honest to show you how he gets him out of there. Does he have to sneak out of there? And that maybe could be fun. But I think it's also really cool to just go to the next thing and not waste your time as a reader showing, oh yeah, they drove across town and traffic was bad on this road, but they went and they took this road instead, and then they got there and then they did this. So not that everybody needs to do that much, but I think it's, lets me really concentrate on the pacing and providing interesting moments in the right amount and then pace. So we kind of get into this. There's a little bit of humor here, or humor such as I'm capable of doing. And he kind of has a New York, like Three Stooges accent as he's thinking about what's going on. And then I kind of do this, what I think is kind of a funny bit, where he learns. He doesn't seem like the smartest character, but he is going to learn about demonology and the occult and just figure out what's going on and what he needs to do. So he goes to the library, finds, after going through a lot of books, a picture of this old demon from what looks like the 1600s or something. And we cut away showing, she's gotten better. She's looking over the city. She's plotting. She's doing her thing. And this was a lot of fun. We show that he's, in this 5 or 6 page sequence, he becomes whatever he needs to be. And what I think is a silly, but not, detracting way of doing it. And he becomes kind of a pith helmet adventurer, sort of a proto Indiana Jones. The colors in this scene, I found a few old travel posters. This was kind of an atypical color scheme, but I really liked it and kind of used it for this scene. It was I didn't want to do that sort of yellow filtered look that you get for scenes like this a lot. I wanted to mix it up, make it different, and especially to do it in a way that spoke to the period I'm referencing, which is the 30s and the 40s. So he finally finds this scroll in the forest, gets it, and he starts reading some instructions that have to do with what's going to happen to Captain Lancet. He realizes he's going to be asleep for 121 years and instantly says, wait a second, how am I going to keep this guy safe and alive that long? So he makes his way back home in kind of an Indiana Jones Rocketeer sort of map looking thing for one of these fun type panels. that the 30s and 40s comics used a lot. And of course, this is a great convention of older movies and cartoons. The newspaper headline, which I loved signing. So I'm going to give you a better look at that. Found a good way, a few examples that I could emulate and put these together to show. I think it's just another fun way of showing, what's going on in the world. If I'm going to do something like that, I always kind of want to do it in a way that adds some value and some reference to the time period. So I think the newspaper and the map will manage to do that. So he's back home. He's still wearing his adventurer costume, and he sees Captain Lancet in bed. And in my conception of this, he's wearing his costume in a hospital gown for some reason for 120 years, for the most part. So then he switches to his reading jacket, starts reading the books, figuring out what he's got to make in his next move, how he can stay around that long or set up some kind of system to keep Captain Lancet safe and alive until he wakes up. He says, Eureka. I kind of took for this, he finds a book called Cloning for Regular Joes. I don't know if it's too obvious here or if it needs to be for the joke to work, but what I did on these was take those books that would say Accounting for Dummies or The Internet for Dummies that were popular a few years ago with the yellow covers, and just did a very 1930s pass on that. So threw that in there, named to be determined, PhD, just kind of a silly reference to these types of books that would be out later. So years pass, we see that Satanica is spreading her organization out. And then we see Maxie in his lab coat like a mad scientist doing work. We see that the vampires are getting worse and worse as we cut back to him building crazy machines. This was a lot of fun to do. It's actually one of my favorite panels in the entire book. It took a while, but I think it's a kind of just a fun little not too in your face composition. So we do another thing here, which I think again takes place very much in the language of the 1940s stuff. We see that Satanica, Scarlet Twilight, is spreading its reach out to the entire world. And as that's happening, they say Maxie's work came to its dramatic conclusion, which is him connecting the last wire here. And we see all these clones firing up, which I think is pretty clear. This is sort of a Frankenstein, reference way of doing it. And as soon as it works, everybody's awake. He says, all right, we got work to do. And everybody's pretty on board with it without too much explanation. I hope these are funny. I don't know if they are as funny to me as they are to everyone else as they are to me, but I thought they worked. I thought they were the kind of humor I could do. And is also not too clever, in your face, sort of self-referential bit. And hopefully it worked. We go back to building up what Lady or Madame Satanica is doing. She's addressing Congress. Obviously, she's taken over. I didn't make it too obvious, but this is supposed to be a vampire, mixed in there with the regular politicians. We see vampires taking over the whole world. We got this gangster-looking guy with a beret because he's in France, as you would do if you're a vampire in Paris. Taking over. You want to have a silly mustache and wear a beret. So we do another thing. We mentioned that, mankind was reduced to serfdom, kept alive only to feed the vampires' endless thirst. And, what I kind of wanted to do there was just, kind of say, hey, I didn't want to show humanity being subjugated or anything like that. I didn't want to get in any imagery that was really dark, which I think that would necessarily be, especially given the time period. So that's another great thing about the era of comics drawing from, is they had a lot of different ways to sell things. The story, you could do things with just type. You could do things off panel in ways that are nice to use, because while I do want to mention that things are happening, sometimes showing it can be a bit dark, and I didn't want to do that. I want to keep the tone of this book very light, despite some things being sort of dark that happens within them. And that was a good way to, like I said, feed into the period references, but also do what I need to do for my storytelling. So here we see, and this is another one of my favorite panels, Satanica in her throne room. Everybody's pledging allegiance to her. And we see these buildings going up over the Empire State Building. So we see that the world is expanding. And here's a quick throwaway bit that I hope wasn't too silly. I'm not the funniest person, but I thought it would be fun to just throw a quick aside in there that showed nighttime baseball taking over with vampires becoming much better at the sport than we had in our timeline. And then we go back to the original Maxi here in his wheelchair and his dotage, and the new Maxi clones ready to pick up and carry on his work. The colors on this one, I really liked how it turned out. I don't think I've ever done a color scheme quite this out there, but it was fun. And like I said, it worked. I think it also provided, by being a lot different, a good storytelling thing where I this is kind of out of the regular step of the book. And of course, this last panel is a throwback to the first one in terms of color. We wanted to kind of almost as if this took place in the same shoot, more or less. They're in the same place. So that sequence kind of ends as it began, with these clouds and these colors. So back to the Empire State Building. We see that they've been explaining, what went on in the centuries he's been asleep. And this is a fun, I hope, sequence where this is a throwback to, if you've seen some of the old comic books that explain the Bat Cave back in the day, they have a whole diagram. They say, oh, the Bat plane was here and the Bat boat was there, and here's Wayne Manor, and here's the lab, and here's all that stuff. That's kind of what I was going for with this layout. And with the rest of it, I kind of wanted to set up some of the environments we'd see later on in the story. And so we knew what those were a little bit. We'll see Captain Lancet come back into the planning room later on. And this was fun. I'm doing a straight up James Bond training sequence here where we see the Maxis training. They're training in karate. We've got a guy with a flamethrower for no particular reason other than it's fun. And it reminds me of that scene from Wayne's World where they were going through the James Bond training room that was, I think, referencing From Russia with Love. And I kind of had this three-phrase, thing I've been kind of associating with the Maxis. In the way they talk to each other. Hopefully that's funny. If not, I hope it's not too annoying. And that was the idea. And then we have a very much James Bond Q scene here where he's in the lab. They've got weapons, designs for weapons, working on all sorts of machines. Everybody's in lab coats. And hopefully it was a lot of fun for me to put together. I'm a huge 007 fan. And these scenes, you see why they have those scenes, I think, and they copy them in a lot of other movies. They really work. I'm lucky I'm doing something that is such a referential story, so it fits for me to kind of pick up on that. But it also lets you cover a lot of cool ground and set up some things. So if you remember in issue 1, if you've read that, he's a vampire and he carries around these old ray guns that he pretends do things that are crazy, that if someone ever gets away or he lets them go, if they change their ways, he can say, oh, I was able to get out of this trap because of my ray guns. In fact, he was able to because he was a vampire. So he sees they've made some more of them, and he assumes they're just toys like the other one he had. So he's reassured to see that. After being asleep so long and being in such an unfamiliar place, he's glad to see some remnant of his old life, and he's going to start messing around and playing with them. But he finds quickly, as he tries to shoot at these target dummies, that they've made it work. He's got a fully functional ray gun now. And so we go there. We show that was kind of the gun works, of course, but then it caused a little bit of a mess. And move on to the next scene. And we hint that he has updated something else. And we see Captain Lancet saying, oh, cool. I'd like to see what that is. And so it's his new costume. And I'll explain a little bit of that here. They're planning their assault on Madame Satanica on the Scarlet Twilight, knowing that he was going to wake up now. So they were kind of getting things ready and say, hey, here's what we decided to do. You ready to lead us in the battle? And he, of course, is. There's a little bit of a reference here where I kind of set up the plan that they're going to attack Penn Station as part of their plan. Back in, I want to say, the World War I era, I think there was I think I read somewhere in a history book that Lenin said you don't need to take over all of the country. He was trying to start a revolution in Russia. You just have to take over the train stations and the telegraph stations in a few places. So that was my really blurry rationale for what they're trying to do here. They're going to take Penn Station, they're going to take over the radio stations, and hopefully lock things down to the point where they can free humanity and get things back on the right track. At least that is, I always call stuff like that comic book logic. Do I really think that holds up to scrutiny? No, but I do think it's enough to get the story moving and make it plausible enough. And so they were talking about Penn Station. If you follow any history, we had a really cool Penn Station in the up till the '60s, which they tore down and replaced with Madison Square Garden, and the current Penn Station, which is one of the most miserable places you could ever go. But so he says, oh, they might replace it with that ugly arena they keep talking about, which of course in our world has happened. So we see him in silhouette here as he addresses them, and then we pan out to see his new outfit, his new uniform. This came out of some alternate designs as I was developing the uniform. I hit on something I liked. This was one of the steps that got me there when I first came up with that logo. I liked this a lot. About a week or two later, I was looking at them and I looked at this particular design. While the other one was definitely the right one for the 1930s costume, I thought this one really looked cool and I wanted to do something with it. So I said, oh, maybe when he's in the future for a while, he could have this costume. And the rationale would be he had that designed in the interim. And so it can look a little more, I don't think it necessarily looks futuristic, but it looks more modern than anything you'd see in the Golden Age comics. It doesn't have like the sort of shorts and things like that that to me really are necessary to sell him as this is like a Golden Age type character. So it gave me a reason to use this outfit for about half of the story, frankly, and it was cool to do, I think. So that's page 12. I'm gonna pop off here and get back to work, but I just wanted to go through if you're into the story again, please check out the campaign live now on Zoop. It's doing really well. If you have been collecting it through the Kickstarters, you're up to 1 through 3. You can get issue 4. If you're new to it, you can catch up on other issues. If you're also new to it, you can get or you read the other ones and you'd like to have a better version. We're going to do a hardcover that collects 1 through 4 with a lot of new art. That's sketches, development things, a lot of pages that go into what I was thinking with the story, historical stuff that went into developing it that I played with, and other things that inspired me. So again, I hope you'll check that out. I'll do another live stream in the next few days going through the second part of issue 2, and hopefully providing some interesting stuff if you'd like to hear how these comics get developed and what goes into developing the story, the visuals, all that stuff. So please, again, if you're into it, check it out. I think you'll really like issue 4. 2.5 pages from done. I really love how it's coming together, and I think you will too. So I'm going to leave you with the trailer for Scarlet Twilight 4, and I will see you soon.